Elvis fans, and I am definitely not one of them, or at least I wasn't until my mind and opinion started to change after reading this Elvis book. And then things changed even more after seeing this documentary. Here's a story of how that all happened and the book and doc that changed my mind. Elvis was what my parents were into. Their friends loved Elvis. I was listening to Kiss, and this was around like age 13, 14, and there was really no way Elvis stood a chance at that time for me. And then as I got a little older, I got into Little Richard and Chuck Berry, Bo Diddley. To me, they started rock and roll, not Elvis, or at least my version of Elvis. He was the guy my parents' friends cried about when he died. I didn't get it. To me, he was the jumpsuits, Vegas, Graceland, the impersonators. I think the mythology swallowed the musician. And I had one other big problem with Elvis. He didn't write his own songs, so I never really got into him until last year. Things started to change a little bit when I read my first Elvis book. And honestly, I picked it up because it really wasn't about Elvis. The name of the book is The Colonel and the King, Tom Parker, Elvis Presley, and the Partnership That Rocked the World. And this is really about Tom Parker. It's really just focusing on his story that is so unbelievable that I was hooked immediately when I started reading the book. He was born Andreas Cornelius van Kuijk in the Netherlands, and he spent his childhood constantly running away from home to the point of his parents rarely knew where he was. And this is when he was in his teens. At 16, he tried to sneak his way to America by stowing away on a ship. He got caught, and then he got sent back. 3 months later, he tried it again, but this time he figured out who he needed to know aboard the ship to make it work. So now he's in America. He has a 5th grade education. He barely speaks English, but he has this incredible natural instinct for hustling and promoting and creating a larger-than-life version of himself. Eventually, Andres van Kuijk becomes Tom Parker. Tom Parker becomes Colonel Tom Parker. And almost everything about the identity he created was part reality, part invention, part not really true. And that fascinated me. Even before Elvis entered the picture, this guy was a very interesting character. So I was really getting into the book, and what I really enjoyed about the book was not only the story about Colonel Tom Parker, but this is what drew me to the book in the first point, was this book includes hundreds of letters that Parker sent to Elvis, Elvis's family, to different record labels, movie studios, promoters, and other business associates. So you get a first-hand account of what's going on. These letters can't be smudged. You're not relying on an author telling you what Parker supposedly thought of or said. These are his own words, and they're sitting right there in front of you. This is proof solid of who this guy was, and also it gave me a lot of real insight into Elvis. But that isn't exactly what changed my mind about Elvis. What surprised me is that it wasn't necessarily Elvis himself who started changing my mind. It was understanding the world around him, and especially the guy who helped build that world, Colonel Tom Parker. Because if you watch Colonel Tom Parker figure out how to promote Elvis, negotiate with the record companies and deal with the movie studios and sell the merchandise, book the shows, and manage this phenomena that was getting bigger and bigger by the day, you begin to understand just kind of how unprecedented Elvis Presley really was and how unprecedented that phenomenon and what Tom Parker was doing at that time. There wasn't a blueprint of how to do all this. Marketing and promotion at that time was nothing for rock and roll. And Parker and Elvis were figuring it out while it was going on. And that made me look at Elvis a little bit differently. These letters busted through that mythology that I was hung up on. And as I read, I began to see Elvis as not simply an icon, but as a young musician, a young guy sitting at the center of something popular culture had never really experienced before. And this book made me more curious about Elvis because it gave me context I never had. And maybe that's one of the best things about reading rock and roll history. Sometimes the right book doesn't just teach you something new about an artist you already love. Sometimes it makes you consider one you thought you already had figured out. So that's where the door opened for me about Elvis. But what kicked it open was this new documentary that just came out a couple of months ago. What made this doc, out of all the other documentaries that are out there, so special? Let me get into that after the break. Stories like these about rock and roll history and culture are what I'm all about. And I've taken this podcast and expanded it out into a newsletter. My newsletter comes out once a month, and it's all about rock and roll history and culture, all about the books, the docs, the stories, the products, and people that are out there every month that I feel really matter and I feel I want to share with you. So if you want to know what the new books are coming out, if you want to know about the new Dave Mustaine book, the new Metallica book, the new Oasis documentary, the new Rush documentary that was just announced, I put it all together in a monthly newsletter. The subscription is free. I'll put the link in the show notes. Every podcast has a show notes that talk about the show. Hit the link. You get a free subscription to the newsletter. It comes out once a month. That keeps you on top of all this great rock and roll history and culture. So what sealed the deal for me? How did I become to appreciate Elvis? I'm going to come right out and say it, to really appreciate Elvis. Well, I was watching this documentary that came out. The name of it is Epic, Elvis Presley in Concert. That was the doc that pushed it even further for me. The producer's name is Baz Luhrmann, and he went back to the footage from Elvis, That's the Way It Is, and Elvis on Tour, those films that covered Elvis in Las Vegas in 1970 and on the road in 72. But instead of filling the documentary with your typical historians and celebrities or talking heads explaining Elvis to us, he basically just kind of got out of the way. The original footage also has been restored by Peter Jackson's team in New Zealand. And you know what that means? It looks just incredible. The colors just jump. The contrast is so sharp. But it wasn't the restoration that changed my mind about Elvis, though the way it looked definitely helped. But really, it was watching him work. I've never seen this side of Elvis before. You see him in rehearsals. You see him joking around with other musicians, being really loose. He's working through arrangements. He's funny. He's screwing around, but you always see the work ethic and how seriously he takes the music and his crazy musical knowledge. And then he walks onto the stage and somehow becomes something completely different. And these shows, there's no giant video screens, no fireworks, nothing elaborate, no big elaborate costumes. He does wear some stuff, but it's not crazy. It's not all about that. It's just really Elvis standing in the middle of it. He is the spectacle. They use a lot of archival audio of Elvis throughout the film also. So instead of somebody just telling you what Elvis is thinking, you hear Elvis reflecting on his career. That was really cool. He talks about his image and how he got into the business. And combined with the rehearsals and the concert footage, it makes the whole thing just feel so much more intimate. And that was something I never felt from watching Elvis before. And now I'm going to put the cherry on top because I just finished up a new book, and it's written by the only author to win 2 Rock Talk Studio Awards. He won it for his book, Mysteries in the Music, in 2024. And then last year for The Beatle Who Vanished. The author is the rock and roll detective himself, Jim Berkenstadt. Jim's new book, Elvis Presley, Conversations with Scotty Moore. Their first-hand interviews he did with Scotty, Elvis's longtime guitarist. And other than Tom Parker, you couldn't really get much closer to Elvis than Scotty Moore, who was with Elvis really right from the beginning. I mean, the first time Elvis and Scotty were together, Elvis came over to Scotty Moore's house and they jammed. And the book is built on these interviews with Scotty, and it shows how the two of them made music together throughout the years. It's a fascinating look at not only Scotty Moore's tremendous contribution, but Elvis through the eyes of someone who was right next to him. You get Moore's perspective on the business aspect of Elvis' career and what it was like for someone in his band to witness the tsunami that exploded on the world when Elvis started climbing the ranks. And Berkenstadt did a great job of the pacing with the interviews to not only allow for this really one-of-a-kind perspective, but also make the Scotty Moore recollections of this time in rock and roll history fascinating read. You also get, or this is really cool, a legendary Albert Lee provided the foreword, just adding more accolades to what Scotty Moore's playing meant to all the young rockers at that time. The foreword goes perfect with the quotes that follow. You got a quote from George Harrison, and then Paul McCartney, and then Keith Richards, all of them praising the sound of Scotty Moore great new book, Elvis Presley, Conversation with Scotty Moore by Jim Berkenstadt. So I got to see the Tom Parker side of Elvis, this great doc, and all those fascinating eye-opening performances, and then read interviews from his longtime guitarist Scotty Moore talking to one of my favorite authors. And suddenly, what do you know? Appreciating Elvis has become a lot easier for me than it ever was before. I also want to shout out to a listener who encouraged me to look a little bit deeper at Elvis. His story about seeing Elvis when he was young was one of the things that made me want to watch that epic doc, and I really appreciate that insight. Shout out to Vaughn M. You rock, Vaughn. I appreciate the rock and roll conversations and all the support. Okay, time to tear it down, pack it up, and head on down the road this week on the Rock Talk Studio. Thanks, everybody. I'll see you next time for more artifacts, myths, stories, and moments that define and celebrate the art form we know and love as rock and roll.